So the last video went through the first part of chapter 10 notes, and today what we're going to be doing is looking at the second half of that set of notes. They're all in one Google Slides um, presentation. So if you click on those chapter 10 notes, you'll see them. The tail end of these notes actually goes along with chapter 11, but it's a very brief amount of information. So rather than give it its own whole chapter worth of notes, we're going to cover it here. So last time we finished off talking about profit maximizing cases. We looked at the fact that your price should be above your average total cost. In fact, let me go back to here. Price curve or demand curve should be above your average total cost curve in order to maximize your profit. But that doesn't always happen. There are some situations where rather than maximizing the profit, you may be in a situation where you're minimizing the loss. You take on a loss for a period of time and try to hold on for that situation to improve for you. Again, that's what many businesses are doing right now in our economy. So, loss minimization occurs where price is greater than minimum average variable cost. This also goes along with number 15 on that list of key ideas. The idea is that just like profit maximizing case, you're looking for marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Your losses will be at a minimum where your marginal revenue curve crosses your marginal cost curve. So let's look at that on a graph. You'll notice that your average total, average variable costs and marginal cost curves are all in the same place. So your marginal cost still intersects that average total and average variable at their minimum. The only thing that's changed is this price or demand curve here. So originally, in the last graph we looked at, it was at 131. That was the price. In this situation, the market price dropped to 81. So now your profit maximizing point, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, is actually below your average total cost curve. We call this loss minimizing because you're still covering a portion of your cost. You're still above your average variable cost curve. So you're covering, it doesn't really make sense for you to shut down completely because you're still making some money, but you're holding on hoping that that price will increase. A really good example of that right now would be dairy farmers. I don't know if you've seen any of the news stories, but there are dairy farmers who have lost a lot of business because schools aren't in operation. Restaurants aren't operating. And so they're actually having to dump some of their milk because otherwise their price would become too depressed, and they're trying to stick in that loss minimizing situation where they can hold on for the short run. So the key here is instead of your price curve being above average total cost, it's now between your average total and average variable cost. So the output that we would be looking at is slightly less than 6. You can't make slightly less than something. And so therefore the place where we would actually produce on this graph would be 5 whole units. Now, the third situation is where you're bleeding so much money that you actually have to shut down. So, if your price is less than your minimum average variable cost, that would be a situation where you would shut down. So, here's what that would look like. Again, notice that our three cost curves are in the same position. What has changed is our price curve or our demand curve. So this is a shutdown point because your price is less than your minimum average variable cost. The price is $71. Your minimum variable cost, average variable cost is 74, which it tells you right here as well as right here. Again, our marginal cost and marginal revenue are crossing right here. So this is going to be a situation where, because that's below your average variable cost, you're going to shut down altogether. You won't be producing anything because you're not even covering your basic cost. You're not even covering the cost of your labor if you stay open. So again, loss minimizing, or let's start with profit. So profit maximizing is going to be where your price is above ATC. Loss minimizing would be where your price is between ATC and ABC. And then shutdown case would be where your price is less than your average variable cost. So when it comes to, whoops, When it comes to making decisions about profit, there's a couple questions that businesses have to answer. The first is, should this firm produce? Should we even be in production? The answer is yes, if the price is equal to or greater than the minimum average variable cost. In other words, if your loss is less than that of your fixed cost, then it makes sense for you to stay in business. The second question is, what quantity should the firm produce at? And the answer to that is going to be where your marginal revenue or price is equal to your marginal cost. At that point, if the price is above your costs, your profit will be maximized. If it's between average total and average variable, you'll be in the loss minimizing position, but it still makes sense for you to stay in business. The third question is, will production result in an economic profit? Yes, if your price exceeds average total cost. If it does not, you'd be either loss minimizing or shut down. And at the bottom of this slide, it says to go ahead and complete perfect competition practice 2. We're going to come back to that. I actually added a few things to this that I want to cover here really quickly before you jet off to that practice. So this information here deals with perfect competition in the long run. So I just want to talk about this briefly. They dedicate chapter 11 to that in your text, but it's very tied in with what you've already learned. And so I just want to cover it briefly here. So first of all, what you're looking at are the cost curves for perfectly competitive markets on the left. Hopefully that looks familiar. In this case, they're showing an economic profit situation where your price curve is greater than your average total cost curve. Now, the thing that I didn't tell you when you learned about supply and demand is that those upward sloping supply curves and downward sloping demand curves that you learned about at that point, they actually were referring to supply and demand in perfect competition. So that's why we played the game called A Market in Wheat, because agriculture is the closest thing that we have to perfect competition. So on the left-hand side, what you see are those curves for a firm. And then if we multiply that by the number of firms in the industry, we can derive the demand and supply curve. So you get that downward sloping demand curve. Your supply curve roughly becomes your marginal cost curve for perfect competition. So what this is saying on the left-hand side, that the firm should produce 8 items. On the right-hand side, what we're saying is the market should produce 8,000 items. So again, where your marginal cost and marginal revenue curves cross on the left, that becomes your equilibrium price on the right. So one leads to the other. Everything we talked about at the beginning in the last video, as well as loss minimizing and shutdown situation, refers to the short run. But we need to talk about profit maximization in the long run. So in the long run, remember, all firms or all inputs are variable. And the key thing to remember is that firms will enter and exit the market. And that has to do with number of sellers, which hopefully sounds familiar to you because it's a supply shifter. And when the supply curve shifts, we know that that affects price. And when price shifts, we know that affects profit. So all of those things that you've learned about supply and demand are all sort of coming together right here. So long run equilibrium will occur in perfect competition where marginal revenue equals marginal cost equals your minimum average total cost. So here's what that looks like. Oh, I thought I had a graph. We'll get there. We'll get there. Hold that thought for just a second. So when we're talking about long run equilibrium, that time frame when your all your inputs are variable, if you have people, if you have a situation where businesses are making profits, other entrepreneurs are going to notice that because entrepreneurs gravitate towards profit. So if you are an entrepreneur and you see someone in the field making good money, you're likely to check that out. You may decide to enter that market structure yourself. And when that happens, then you're making everybody's piece of the pie a little bit smaller. So in the long run, generally firms will produce at what's called a zero profit. So firms enter, the supply increases, The price will fall as a result, and you'll be back to your original price. Exits eliminate losses. So if you have a whole bunch of people that are in a market and they're not making money, some people are going to be in a situation where they have to shut down. They're at that shutdown point. And when that happens, the number of sellers decreases, so supply will decrease. When supply decreases, price goes up. When price goes up, you start making money again. That's why people hold on during that loss minimizing situation. So here's what that looks like on a graph. And unfortunately, this graph doesn't move. I couldn't show it to you on PowerPoint on this video. I'm sorry about that. But on the left-hand side, you have the marginal cost, average total cost, marginal revenue for a single firm. Remember what I said a couple slides ago is where those three things are equal, that's where your long-term production or long-term profit maximizing point is going to be. So here's our marginal cost curve. Here's our marginal revenue curve and our minimum average total cost curve. So if we're in a situation where our price is up here around $55, that's where entrepreneurs begin to notice each other making money, and some of them are going to enter. When they enter, if we go over here, if this is our original supply curve, when those new entrepreneurs enter the market, it shifts our supply curve to the right. And when our supply curve shifts to the right, what happens is that our price goes down. And so when our price goes down, if this is our original price here, and then we see businesses leave the market, we see businesses enter the market, our price goes down. When our price goes down, notice we are back at that original spot where we started. Now, if we're in a situation where it's a loss minimizing scenario where your price is lower, the opposite will occur. So people will leave the market, the price will go up, you'll be closer to your overall long run profit. Key things to remember: entries eliminate profits and exits eliminate losses. And your long run situation is going to look like this over here. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost equals average total cost. So the last slide was your entry. This slide better illustrates exit eliminating loss. So again, let's say that you're in the situation where your price is down here at like $35. In that case, that's going to be a shutdown scenario for some businesses, and so they will leave the market. So if S1 is our original supply curve, and then businesses leave the market, so that means the number of sellers decreases, our supply curve shifts left. When it shifts from supply 1 to supply 3, notice the price goes up. And now, just like that, we're back at that long run equilibrium. So again, entry eliminates profit, exit eliminates loss, and in the long run, the perfectly competitive market will balance right there where those three curves are equal. All right, so a couple things to remember. This goes along with some of those key items as well, numbers 23, 24, and 25. First of all, in the long run, efficiency is achieved in perfectly competitive markets. Those businesses have to be perfectly efficient, otherwise they cannot compete. They can't keep their costs low enough in order to stay out of that shutdown scenario. There are two types of efficiency that occur that you need to know. So make sure you star this or underline it. First one is productive efficiency. This is where you're using the least cost techniques to produce your materials. So you figure out the best method, the best resources, the best capital, and you are operating at the least cost situation. That happens where your price is equal to your minimum average total cost. And remember, that happens in the long run. Those are two of the curves that intersect. The other type of the other type of efficiency that occurs is allocative efficiency. And this is the idea that the most wanted items by consumers are the ones that are produced by businesses. And that will be achieved if you're producing where price equals your marginal cost. So you need to know that difference, what productive efficiency is and what allocative efficiency is. So here is one more look at those curves. On the left-hand side, you've got the long run equilibrium for a single firm, where marginal cost equals average total cost equals price. On the right-hand side, you've got your market equilibrium. In the long run, that traditional downward sloping demand curve, upward sloping supply curve. And again, the consumer and producer surplus are maximized. And so you have maximized your efficiency in that situation. Couple more things and then we're done. Hang in there with me. So, the thing about markets is that purely competitive markets will automatically adjust to things like changes in consumer tastes, resource supplies, and technology. Think about commercials that you've seen on TV recently. We've been in this situation where we've been locked down for like 3 weeks. I started seeing commercials aimed at people in lockdown probably a week after all of this happened. Those companies are making dynamic adjustments to be able to keep their doors open, offering things like curbside service or delivery, things that they didn't offer before. And all of that is because we are in a free market economy. So, down at the bottom, there's a question that says, what theory proposed by Adam Smith explains this, explains those dynamic adjustments? See if you can think of it. Hopefully, you came up with the idea of the invisible hand, which we talked about back at the beginning of the semester. So, this is the idea that proponents of free markets point to that say, hey, this is just better. The market can act more quickly. The commercials aimed at people staying home started way before the government decided that they were going to give people a check. And as of today, the day I'm recording this, I haven't received a check from the government, but I have been seeing commercials on how I can get things delivered to me. So the idea is that the market is more efficient than what the government can do. All right. And last but not least, this leads to the idea of creative destruction. So sometimes competition and innovation lead to creative destruction. We create new things and get rid of old things. Blockbuster Video is a great example of this. So we used to have video stores where you could go and check out videos and you'd pay a fee. And then, of course, along came Netflix, which originally would mail videos to your house and then eventually became a streaming service. And now we don't really watch that many movies on discs anymore. And it's a bad thing if you were Blockbuster, but it's allowed the markets to move in other directions. So that is often called creative destruction. And with that, we are done with chapter 11 and done with chapter 10. So the next thing for you to do is perfect competition practice part 2. That is scheduled for the next day, if the next school day. If you want to go right through while this is fresh in your mind, you can always do that. And the next thing coming after that is getting ready for a quiz. So as always, if you've got questions, let me know.